Hey guys, welcome back to the Dylan and Andrew show, where it's a couple of loose cannons talking about a couple things. Yep, where we talk about Master Chief more than anything.
Hey,
Actually, we had a long conversation about it
we did.
yesterday. We'll see. I doubt the tides will change anytime soon, but you got to respect it, right? You got to respect it. Andrew, do you want to introduce our
I
topic
do.
today?
We're gonna start off today. We're gonna be talking about kind of in a related vein to our last discussion. We're gonna be talking about the biblical our biblical approach to rest and work and how we approach both, how we balance them, proper way to do them. Really, whatever we come up with. And part of my reasoning for wanting to discuss this is I was at work, that is at home, working, and I came across an article that was recommended to me on my little Firefox thing. If you guys have Firefox, it gives you little article recommendations on the when you first open it up. So I saw an article called "Having Fun is a Virtue, Not a Guilty Pleasure." So initially, me and the rest of the leadership team at the fellowship, which is our young adults group at St. Albert Alliance Church, we had just finished a book by I believe John Mark Comer um, called "The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry," and that was all about the proper way to rest and the easy yoke that Jesus offers to us in this frenetic, crazy world. So I came into this article thinking, wow, I'd like to see what the world, a worldly perspective has to say about balancing rest and fun and work. Um, so as I read through it, I was actually pretty surprised by the author's view on uh, actually Judeo-Christian philosophy, as she calls it. So basically, the article starts off talking about how, which I agreed with. They're like, you know, um, in North America, there is a kind of a epidemic of workaholism, where people are identifying with their career. And there's a quote here from Derek Thompson from The Atlantic, apparently. I've got the article here in front of me. It says, everyone worships something, and workism, as he calls it, is among the most potent of the new religions competing for congregants. So initially, I'm like, wow, like this is pretty cool. This is very interesting. Um, but she actually goes into a really interesting perspective, and I'll read this paragraph here that she says. She says, um, uh, indeed, Western society only began to shun pleasures and to view work as virtuous thanks to Christian ethics. The Greek philosopher Aristotle thought that work makes you a worse person, but Judeo Christian philosophy holds that work is a means of imitating God's act of creation and so views work as divine. Millions of people who've abandoned theist practices still hold on to the religious belief that work is inherently virtuous. So
Hmm.
now, I'll let you jump in here for a second, Dylan. But what struck me there is that this woman, who's writing this article, clearly has this idea about Christianity, that Christianity is a belief system, a philosophy that promotes um, self denial to the extent that pleasure is actually bad, is what she's saying. And she's stating this like it's a known fact. And there's no reference here. She cites a lot of sources in this article, but this statement has no source cited. And to me, we just read this book on how rest and slowing down is such a central part of Jesus' life and message. So it was a huge kind of shock to me, and it made me wonder like how many people believe this about Christianity, and that keeps them from seriously considering it as a belief system. So, Dylan, I would love to hear your initial thoughts as I have read that.
Totally. Yeah, honestly, the first thing I thought of when you said, I'm a big philosophy guy. I like to read a lot of the Greek philosophers, and when she brought up Aristotle there, I immediately thought of one of the church fathers who was actually considered the doctor of the church by one of the popes at one point in history. This man's name is Thomas Aquinas. He
Mm.
lived around the 1200s, and he wrote actually a five-part series called the Summa Theologica, which I'm kind of obsessed with right now. Um, and he wrote part of that was actually inspired by Aristotelian thought,
Mm.
and so it's like this author is completely talking out of her butt right now when she's saying things like that, or Aristotle thought rest was good, and now Christians are saying that rest is bad.
Mm.
When one of the people who was considered the doctor of the church studied Aristotle and wrote actually there's I just looked up um, a part of the Summa Theologica right now, and the article is how we ought to relate to the seventh day. And basically, he throughout this article, it's question 73. Throughout this article, he's basically saying how we were made to rest.
Mm.
We were made to work, but then we were made to rest. Like even God created a new thing upon the earth. Miracles are also new works in which he said, renew thy signs and work new miracles. And yet this lady is saying like that it is completely abhorrent to the Christian value that rest is a thing when rest in and of itself creates
Mm.
newness. If you actually think about it, um, and you apply it to your life, I guarantee you'll feel new and better refreshed when you actually take a day of rest than if you
Mm.
don't.
And I mean,
And
what
so,
better model of that than the very first story in the Bible, right? Where literally God Himself rests after the work that He does. So if work was so virtuous in the Judeo-Christian view, as she said, why would God not work 7 days a week rather than six, right? So,
mhm.
but continue.
And it's interesting too. It's interesting too how the seventh day is the only day of the creation account that actually warrants or is listed with a specific day in mind.
Mm.
All the other ones actually aren't given a specific day of the seven except the Sabbath day, the day of rest. And so it's kind of like he's saying, well, actually, all of this, it doesn't really matter when these things happened or how long it took for them to happen. What does matter is that on the seventh day, I rested from all of this stuff. And I mean, I love, like you said, we just read a book called The Ruthless Slow Nation of Hurry, and there's a quote in it here by John Mark Comer. He says, "Our time is our life, and our attention is the doorway to our hearts. The mind is the portal to the soul, and what you fill your mind with will shape the trajectory of your character.
Mm.
Hurry is violence on the soul, and hurry is a form of violence on the soul." So he repeats it there. And what the Sabbath is meant to do with this day of rest that this lady is saying like is not Christian at all. What that rest is supposed to do is it's supposed to slow you down and get you more intertwined with the spiritual aspect of your being. And so just thinking about this lady and just like again, I don't know if you said that there was a source there that she got it from. Like, did she just pull this fact out of
She no,
anywhere? Or
it is completely unsourced. And that it really stood out to me because again, before this, she's sourcing her quotes from Aristotle, she's sourcing all of her quotes, but then she just has that line there that just says Judeo-Christian philosophy believes that work is divine, and there is no citation there at all, which was very weird.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like her ideas, obviously, they're not coming from any kind of relevant
Mm,
source. Her ideas are kind of just her own bias in which she's expressing forward.
mm,
And I mean, like I have talked before about, um, I think I talked in our last episode about the way culture is and individualism a little bit, but that's basing it off of like a postmodern ideology.
mm,
And that postmodern ideology is saying like it's out with it's a large reaction to the assumed certainty of objective efforts or anything to explain reality. So anything objective, it's saying nope, out the window. And what she's saying there is, from my perspective, the Judeo-Christian worldview does not promote any sort of rest, in my opinion. She's not saying it based off of any
mm,
fact. And it's kind of the way that our culture is going too. Like we were talking earlier about the Trump administration and stuff. And it's not about like who's right or who's wrong anymore. It's just about who can shout the
mm.
loudest.
Yeah, we I mentioned this idea of populism, where populism is a political approach where uh, that you strive to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. Um, so what you're saying here is that this shifting uh, uh, culture in our society and even around the world is that it's no longer about um, the necessarily the facts or the truth behind it, but rather it's about who is going to appeal to me, who's going to listen to what I want, who's going to listen to what I have to say. Not because what I have to say is right necessarily, but it's just because I feel like everyone's ignoring me. I feel like I'm not heard, and these people make me feel like I'm heard, make me feel like I'm represented, and therefore I'm going to back them even when their positions or their opinions might even be nonsensical or contradictory. Is that what you're kind of getting at here?
Yeah, yeah, completely. And I mean, I just to kind of take a step back and look at this from a perspective of somebody from, I mean, the states and that where this culture is just thriving right now. I mean, in Canada, it is insanely thriving, but I mean, the states is just like it's just on another level. It's just
Mm,
because they have so many more people than Canada that it's just amplified to the umpth degree.
mm,
But um, one of the I there was a comedian who will remain unnamed, but they basically made a joke when Donald Trump, they came out with a standout when Donald Trump was running for president in 2016. He and his family went to go vote at the polls, and this was a heavily Republican state, and so he ends up going and standing out in line or whatever, and he's making a joke, and he goes, so like and he wasn't afraid to talk politics with anybody, and basically he goes, so what, who are you voting for? And this apparently this is it wasn't the nicest area that he lived in either. It was a lot of poverty and the social class gap was actually quite significant. And he goes, "Well, I'm voting for Trump. He's going to fight for me."
mm,
And this guy just kind of this this comedian who is fairly well off. I'm talking, he's got millions and millions of dollars. With Trump's policies at that time, they were specifically economic,
mm,
and so And I remember back in 2016 how he had mentioned how that he was going to be cutting major corporate taxes and stuff, and cutting taxes on the wealthy and things like this. And so this comedian makes this joke like, well, actually, no, he's not fighting for you. He's fighting for me. And just because he shares something that makes you feel like you are valued or heard, actually isn't the truth.
Mm,
And that's exactly what is this topic of this conversation. And it's kind of like it's sad to see how real it actually is.
mm,
But I mean, it's and stemming this off of that whole idea of even just like the rest and the Sabbath work, and how it's not actually about, because a lot of people, I get it, like a lot of people especially in the States, have to work several jobs just to get by.
mm,
And then they're talking about, like, what do you mean I'm supposed to take a day of rest? I can't even, if I take a day of rest, I won't be able to afford rent next
mm.
week or whatever. But
Wow.
that's the thing. It's like this, and then you get people that actually they don't speak truth into culture, into other people's lives, but they just say like, "Hey, who rah rah bang bang, we're gonna try to make you feel valued to whatever degree, even though that value is coming superficially."
Mm, wow. So, um, we've got this idea that all these people, um, uh, you know, lady writing this article, people in the States, people around the world, they're believing what they want to believe, not necessarily based in fact. Um, that said, um, we want to come with our biblical approach. We want to come at our views on rest, on work, on morality from a place of objectivity, right? Grounded in Christ, not grounded on any kind of shifting sand either of our own opinions or of the opinions of others. So, what do you think in this kind of very shifting and very uh, I guess yeah, very rapidly changing culture, where it's the reality that many people do have to work, all day, 7 days a week to pay their bills. What does the reality of what God is calling us to do in rest actually look like for us?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I mean, um, generally, it's going countercultural. And that's the whole Christian idea, is just to be countercultural. And now, like you may say, um, like I don't do A, B, C, D that God considers sin. Yet, when it comes to everything else, like speeding or not taking a Sabbath rest, I'm just like the rest of the world,
Mm,
and I consider myself no different, because I'm just bang bang bang, gotta go. And I just pulled up an article here. Actually, it's called "Rest as a Virtue,"
mm,
and I kind of thought this was I when you brought up this topic, I googled it, and because I wanted to be a little bit prepared. And this is actually a psychology journal called the Journal of Psychology and Theology, written by three people studying with doctorates for psychology. But this is the abstract. It says, in a culture that values availability, productivity, and speed, a strong work ethic is honored and rewarded. Hard work is seen as virtuous, while rest is given little attention. However, Scripture notes the value of rhythmic, intentional rest practices, i.e., Sabbath keeping, and cultivation of a Sabbath heart. This article explores the values of rest that attends to enjoying, worshiping, and receiving from God outside of this world of performance and productivity. And it just goes on to say basically how a brief survey of those in training with mental health fields who profess the Judeo Christian worldview was conducted. And the results show that uniformly and that without a doubt, that uh, those who kept the Sabbath were significantly more satisfied with the amount and quality of their work and their eventually longevity in that field.
Mm,
So I mean, I definitely recommend looking up this article. I think it's worth a read. It's called "Rest is a Virtue: Theological
mm,
Foundations and Application to Personal and Professional Life." If you just go on Google Scholar and look it up, you'll
mm,
find it. But honestly, like just comparing that to this lady's thoughts, like it's just erroneous. Like she's just making claims that she has no factual evidence for.
mm.
And again, like I hate to stress it, but it's just like that's the way our world seems to be going. It's not about what you say to be true anymore. It's just about how loud you can say it and how much emotion you have behind it.
Mm. Yeah, something you said there, uh, yeah, at the start there, how you just said how the main thing is to be countercultural. It brought me to something that, again, John Mark Comer said in The Elimination of Hurry. Um, Now, I don't have it in front of me here, but basically he said something along the lines of, as Christians, sometimes what can happen often in the church today is that we try to live our lives just like everyone else is living their lives, you know, um, having that successful career, making lots of money, and even spending lots of time, doing hobbies, learning new languages, and just filling up our calendars. We're trying to live our lives just like, the quote unquote the American dream or the Canadian dream or whatever, just like everyone else is living. But then we're also, tacking on Jesus onto that. And he was basically saying that that approach is doomed to fail because the way of Jesus is not um, so simple as merely a set of ideas or a set of beliefs or even a set of practices, but it's a lifestyle. And he constantly brought up this idea of the yoke of that Jesus offers us, right? For those who don't know, a yoke
Mm.
being a tool used by oxen to drag plows across fields. So it's a work tool. But Jesus offers us this yoke, this equipment, um, and it's a complete lifestyle change that Jesus is asking of us, right? This easy yoke he's offering us is not something that we can just pick up along with the rest of everything we've already been doing, but it's actually a complete transformation of the way we live, which is actually, I
Mm.
believe, what most people want, but it is painful to, on some level, to give up the routines that we're comfortable with, right? To step into the unknown. But this is what Jesus is asking of us, right? Um, to abandon, as you said, the culture of the world that even though it does offer us, some good things, it's not to say that everything in culture is is evil, but ultimately every human culture is misguided in either its approach
Mm.
towards achieving whatever it's trying to achieve, or whatever it's trying to achieve itself is ultimately apart from what God wants for us, right? So I think
Yeah,
that's a really good point um, that you made there.
yeah. And then we were talking as well before this. Um, like God bless Tim Keller. I thought he was dead, but again, he's
He's
alive.
still alive.
He's doing well. I hope he's doing well. I
Yeah.
mean, this is mid Corona. He's getting old,
Oh.
but I think he's doing well. I pray he's doing well. But he even came out with a sermon in 2015 called "Work and Rest." Again, it's on YouTube if you want to give it a
Yep.
listen. I definitely think it's worth it. And then also a guy named Matt Chandler, who our young adults group also did a Bible study of Psalm 23 with him. He also came out with a sermon titled Work and
Mm,
Rest. And so obviously this is like a significant, you know, thing that Christians have to take into account for. We have to literally apply this yoke to our
mm,
lives because what does this mean? Like I pulled up Matthew 11 because this is the passage and it says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And this part where he says, "Learn from me." He's not saying like, hear what I have to say, maybe, apply it to your life, maybe not. It's not that big of a deal. No, he's commanding, no, learn from me and apply it to your life. Because the way that I live actually is it gives you rest. All of these religious rules that you think of when you think of me aren't true, and they're a bias and a presupposition that this culture has told you. Obviously, we can see it from the first article you read, this lady. She thinks that, like Christianity is just a bunch of rules and it's a bunch of work.
mm,
When in fact, no, Jesus is saying, like, I have true rest. I have this easy yoke and I want to give it to you.
mm.
But do you want to accept it?
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that in that article you read, that those who kept the Sabbath, as you said, were more satisfied in their careers and just in general. So, and we've talked about here the easy yoke and picking up that easy yoke and getting that true rest. So, in your view, what does it actually look like to keep the Sabbath? What is that like practically? What is the Sabbath, and how do we keep it? And further, how do we pick up that easy yoke and start living in the rest that Jesus actually wants for us?
Mm, yeah, I mean, practically, I think everybody's Sabbath looks slightly different. However, I'm meaning that everybody's rest looks slightly
Mm,
different. Some may find it's easier to rest on a walk than it is to be at home with your family, or some people may find it easier to rest when you are going for a bike ride um, than if you were to, sit down and read a book. So there's no really basic cut and dry Sabbath rule, except for maybe the one where you are actually taking time, intentional time of prayer and just, worship and spending time with God, because that's what the Sabbath was created for. It was created for rest and worship.
mm,
Um, and if you're not incorporating both of those, obviously rest looking like the subjective part of that, but worship, there's objectively worshiping God um, is what you are called to do on the Sabbath. So I don't know what your resting looks like, but it's. I'm not going to say I'm perfect at it either because it is trial and error. You're never going to, one day be like Eureka. Oh, well, you might, but it takes again trial and error. But one day in the soon future, you're never going to be like, Eureka! I found my perfect Sabbath rest
mm.
day. For example, one of my Sabbaths that I took super recently, actually, I I was there's a this was actually not that long ago. Man, time flies when it's quarantine. I freaking thought it was.
Yeah,
Oh, that was like 6 weeks
right?
ago, like a month and a half ago. Um, but anyways, I needed to. I've had a squeak in my rotor in my front left rotor of my car, And so I was going to try to take my wheel off and fix it. And of course, I decided to do this on my Sabbath because I had a little bit of extra free time.
Mm,
Now, for some people, working on their car might be rest. It might not actually be work. It might just be, you enjoy doing it
mm,
and you find that as a way to just wind down. However, me at that time, because I wasn't certain as to what was causing the squealing, I looked at it and I was like, I'm just tired of this. I need to figure this out right now. But while I was doing it, things just kept going wrong. I was constantly, like finding myself irritated and agitated. And eventually it got to a point where I just said, you know what, I'm done. So I just put my wheel back on. I went inside and I was exhausted. And I was only out there for like 15 minutes. And I felt more exhausted than if I were to have just worked like a 4 hour
mm.
shift lifting heavy boxes at a warehouse. And so obviously I knew then, okay, I definitely shouldn't have done that. However, like I said, like it's trial and error.
Mm.
Um, Try to find what rest actually looks like to you. And you know what? Find that it's okay to be bored. Like it's fine to be bored. That's one thing that our culture tells you is not okay because you can just easily go to your phone and watch hours and hours of Netflix or YouTube or whatever. But actually, when's the last time you were bored? And if you're going to say like yesterday for 20 minutes while I was waiting for dinner to cook, whatever, yeah, that's fine. But when's the actual time where you let your soul catch up with your body?
Yeah, I think that point of just uh, how our culture says, you should never be bored, and by that they mean you should always be entertained, right? You should always have your phone in front of you. You should always have Netflix going on. You should get your Chromecast. You can start you can watch your video while you're doing this or whatever. And not that those are inherently bad, but like you're saying, when are you giving time for your soul to just sit and just exist, right? And this is what I love how you said that a Sabbath is both rest and worship, because I think with worship, right, it is a very powerful way to experience the presence of God. And as Rob Reamer says, there's power in the presence, right? God's presence, the presence of Jesus, can is the only thing actually that truly transforms you, that takes you from the place that you are and moves you closer to where God wants you to be. Um, and I think that even though it's for some of us that might not make that a habit, it can be kind of a weird thing at first. It can be kind of, as you said, maybe a boring thing. But I think that the transformation that takes place because of this Sabbath rest and the Sabbath worship is actually bringing us towards the most possibly restful and satisfied place that we can be.
Yeah,
Now we're
yeah,
we're 34 minutes in, um, so we're gonna start to wrap this up here. But Dylan, do you have
cool.
any closing thoughts here as we're on
No,
work, on
no,
rest, on Sabbath?
it's been good to actually just talk about this and express the my heart posture towards what it means to actually rest in our culture today. So
Mm, yeah, yeah, cool. Well, um, takeaway here: Jesus, worship, rest. No, it's
amen,
good.
amen.
I've started doing my a Sabbath recently. Haven't been perfect at it, but it has been a transformative process. So I'd encourage anyone who is on the fence, who's feeling exhausted and they aren't really sure what to do about it and where to go from here. I'd encourage you to pursue this and see what Jesus can do for you. See if he'll meet you in that.
Amen.
So cool.
Amen.
All right. Well,
And with that, guys, thanks for tuning in. If you made it this far, again, like I said last time, good for you. You give yourself a pat on the back because you just listened to the two loose cannons talk about
oh
stuff
yeah.
for 35
Oh yeah.
minutes. So, yeah, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. From a couple guys to you, have a blessed day.
Indeed.